Hi, my name's Mitch, and today I wanted to discuss the film language of a scene from a film that uses minimal editing to great effect. When thinking about what scene I wanted to discuss, there was one that immediately came to mind, and that's of an infamous scene from the underappreciated sequel to The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist III. It's the scene that the film is probably most well known for, and for good reason. It's terrifying, and I'm gonna go through why. So, we open on a long shot of the hospital hallway. It's static and doesn't move until the very end. Because we have areas of the set that are unseen, these three doors on the left create an open space that the audience can fill with whatever their imaginations come up with. The unnatural blue hue behind the closed door in the foreground also adds to this appeal to imagination. Despite data and records indicating the contrary, police officers in mainstream media symbolize safety and protection, and this is doubled onto the fact that just having more than one person in a frame creates a symbolic safety net for the audience. As soon as both officers vacate the frame, the tension in the scene immediately rises as Nurse Keating is isolated. Blocking Nurse Keating at the distance she is and having her take up only a small portion of the frame makes her appear vulnerable. We immediately understand via the conventions of the horror genre that she is likely not safe here. One of the unique aspects of this scene is the long pauses of mundanity before action. We know something's going to happen and we're expecting it, but the scene leaves it just long enough to cause us to question ourselves until the subtle sound design kicks in. Some sort of click that does not sound too out of place in a hospital, but the film knows we're wise to the act and doesn't waste time until it plays a second sound, accompanied with a kind of moan. Again, not too out of place in a hospital, could be a patient, but in succession, it's odd enough that it deserves investigating. The blocking plays another huge part here, as you can imagine an invisible fishing rod attached from the door to Nurse Keating, luring her in and increasing the tension and mystery for the audience. Nurse Keating then looks outside the frame towards where the police officer walked off to, utilising the aforementioned open space, and she looks back towards the door, indicating to us that she is indeed alone. Nurse Keating's slow walk is panicked and intentional. We know there's a feeling of danger, and keeping that for as long as possible increases the dramatic tension. What's interesting here is that we're actually building to the first cut of the scene rather than a scare. The director decided that once we enter the hospital room, we should start relieving the tension instead of building it. He does this by firstly cutting and slowly tracking the camera across the room, filling in the open space in our fear of the unknown. This will also be important later in the scene. Then we find out that the ice melting was the cause of the sound, and finally, the fake-out jump scare.
Can't I get any sleep? What the hell do you want?
Sir, I'm very sorry.
Bad enough you wake me up at 5:30 for breakfast.
Sir, I'm sorry.
You're sorry. I think you do this on purpose. What's your name? I'm going to report you.
My name is Amy Keating. Good night.
Usually in horror films, fake-out jump scares are used as a cheap way to spook an audience without putting in the work, and often more competent horror films will complete tension building like this with a real jump scare with consequences to the story. But the director William Peter Blatty has better ideas as to where to place the real one, and it's when we feel the most secure. The fake-out scare and the ice melting actually counterintuitively acts as a return to safety. It gaslights us into believing that the strange noises we hear should be taken with a grain of salt, as it's just part of the job. This happens at almost the exact midpoint of the scene. Here we cut back to the hallway, and rather than make a second attempt at building danger and tension with the audience, the goal here is to create an atmosphere of trust and safety. We already have the precedent set that odd sounds are now reliable, so we hear the ice to continue to melt, and Nurse Keating makes loud noises off screen to further punctuate this fact. The scene then, of course, adds another layer of security by bringing a police officer back into the frame. Nothing bad can happen when there's another person around, as this is safety in numbers. The audience unconsciously understands this symbolic signaling. We get another strange noise coming from the room closest to Nurse Keating, and we get a second cut, a medium shot of her reaction. We didn't get it the first time because she was vulnerable at that point, so had to remain small in the frame. This time, she's wise to the precedent set and she's among company. We also cut to the door with the same unnatural blue hue as the previous room, which we now have reason to believe is trustworthy. When we cut back to the wide, we realise that the police officer is blocked right next to the door in the frame, like a shield of sorts from any danger the room may pose. Now, Nurse Keating walks across the frame, much less cautious as before, and there's less of a walk required for hesitation, as we are not trying to build tension here, quite the opposite. While she's checking out the room, a second police officer enters the frame, adding another layer of security, but the open space that's created by the room Nurse Keating enters has already been established in our heads by the previous room. We know what they look like. We still feel secure while she's investigating the room as the police officer walks across the hallway and leaves the frame right as Nurse Keating re-enters it. The security of the officer is replaced with the security of the understanding that Nurse Keating didn't find anything out of the ordinary in the room. This is the final layer of safety. This is when the audience feels the most secure, and this is where the director decides to put the real horror scare. The final thing to note is that the scare is punctuated with frightening music unlike the fake-out scare from earlier, and then the immediate juxtaposition of the hooded assailant holding the large secateurs behind her and the cut to the beheaded Jesus statue indicates the horrific act that occurred to Nurse Keating without showing it. I hope you've enjoyed this little breakdown of an overlooked horror classic. If you haven't had the chance to see it or didn't know it existed, I suggest giving this film a go. It's got some incredible performances and is a masterclass in editing tension. Well, that's it for me. See ya.